The human was beaten. Bloody protecting a small alien girl. The crowd never forgot. What came next? The screech of Corvus pierced through the marketplace chaos like a rusty blade through flesh. Garrett Thorne's modified raven dove between the angry faces, black wings spread wide, talons flashing as he tried to shield the small figure cowering beneath the vendor stalls. The little alien girl, no more than 8 in human years, pressed herself against the cold metal supports, her pale blue skin flushed with terror, silver eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from understanding exactly how much danger she was in. "Alien scum doesn't belong here." The mob's leader, a thick-necked freight handler with knuckles already bloodied, raised his neural prod again. "Take your diseases back to whatever rock you crawled from." The child whimpered, her small hands glowing with a faint, pulsing light that seemed to flicker with her rapid heartbeat. Around her, wilted station flowers began to straighten slightly, their stems strengthening, but the effort left her trembling. Corvus landed protective beside her, his enhanced neural implants picking up her distress and translating it into sharp, defensive cries. Garrett had been loading cargo containers on the lower dock when the commotion started. He'd told himself to keep walking. Trouble wasn't his business anymore, hadn't been since the Terran economic collapse took everything from him 5 years ago. But the sound of that terrified sob, the way it cut through his carefully constructed emotional barriers, made his feet stop moving. His hands tightened into fists as he watched the crowd press closer. The child was maybe the same age his sister Lily had been when the debt collectors came for their family farm. When the stress and shame had killed their father and their mother had simply stopped coming home. When 8-year-old Lily had asked him why everyone was so angry all the time, and he hadn't had an answer that wouldn't break her heart. "Hey!" Garrett's voice cracked across the marketplace like a whip. The crowd turned, momentarily startled by the dock supervisor's presence. He was a big man, all corded muscle from years of manual labor. But it was the cold fury in his dark eyes that made them hesitate. "Pick on someone who can fight back." The freight handler laughed, showing broken teeth. "Look what we got here. Alien lover wants to play hero." He gestured to his friends, a mix of off-duty miners and unemployed drifters who'd found purpose in their hatred. "Teach him what happens to traitors." Garrett stepped between them and the child, feeling Corvus's sharp talons dig into his shoulder as the raven took position. "Last warning." The first blow caught him across the jaw, spinning him sideways. The second drove into his ribs, forcing air from his lungs in a harsh grunt. But Garrett had learned to fight dirty in the cargo bays, where fair play got you killed. He grabbed the freight handler's wrist, twisted until something popped, and drove his elbow into the man's solar plexus. The mob surged forward. They came at him from 3 sides, neural prods crackling, fists flying. Garrett managed to drop 2 of them before a shock rod found his spine, sending him to his knees. Blood filled his mouth as boots connected with his ribs, his back, his skull. Through the haze of pain, he heard the alien child crying. Not in fear now, but in desperate concern. "Stop! Please stop hurting him!" Her voice was high and musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "He protected me." The small hands that touched Garrett's broken face were warm and tingling. Where her fingers pressed against his split lip, the bleeding slowed. Where her palm covered the gash on his forehead, the pain dulled to a manageable throb. Her silver eyes were bright with tears and something else, a power that pulsed just beneath her pale skin like bioluminescent waves. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not strong enough yet. Mama says my gift needs time to grow." Corvus hopped closer, his black head tilted as he studied the child with one bright eye. The raven's enhanced senses detected something the humans couldn't. The way plant life throughout the marketplace had subtly changed during her distress, how the air itself seemed cleaner in her immediate vicinity. He gave a soft, approving croak and gently preened a strand of her silver hair. The child smiled for the first time, reaching up to stroke the raven's chest feathers. "You're beautiful," she told him solemnly. like the night birds in our temple gardens. Garrett struggled to sit up, his body protesting every movement. The crowd had scattered when station security finally arrived, leaving behind only scattered debris and the metallic taste of his own blood. He looked down at the alien child, this small, brave creature who had tried to heal a stranger, and felt something shift inside his chest. Something that had been frozen solid since the day he'd failed to save his own sister. "What's your name, kid?" She looked up at him with those impossible silver eyes, her small hand still glowing faintly as she maintained contact with his injuries. "Lyra of the 7th house," she said formally, then added in a smaller voice, "But Mama calls me Lyra." Lyra, close enough to Lily to make his throat close up, different enough not to shatter him completely. "Well, Lyra," Garrett said, accepting Corvus's assistance as the Raven helped him struggle to his feet. "Looks like we're gonna have to stick together until your mama comes looking for you." The way her face lit up, hope replacing fear, trust overriding caution, reminded him why he'd stopped believing in happy endings. But as her small hand slipped into his, and Corvus settled protectively on her shoulder, Garrett found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, some things were worth believing in after all. The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, but Lyra made it feel somehow warmer just by being there. She sat cross-legged on the narrow cot beside Garrett's treatment bed, her small hands moving in slow, careful patterns over his injuries. Corvus perched on the bedside monitor, his enhanced eyes tracking every movement as if memorizing the technique. "The bruising is too deep for me," Lyra explained, her brow furrowed with concentration. "Mama says I'm only strong enough for surface healing until my next molting cycle." She paused, tilting her head. "Do humans molt?" "You're much harder than Zephyrians." Garrett found himself almost smiling despite the pain in his ribs. "We don't molt, kid. We just get uglier with age." He watched her work, fascinated by the way her skin seemed to glow from within when she focused. "What you're doing? This is normal for your people. Some of us." Pride crept into her voice. "My grandmother could regrow entire limbs. Mother says I might be that strong someday if I practice and don't get distracted by—" "Oh!" Her concentration broke as Corvus dropped a small, bright object into her lap. The Raven had somehow acquired a shiny piece of station jewelry during their walk to the medical bay. "Corvus," Garrett warned, but Lyra was already giggling, holding up the trinket to catch the light. "It's beautiful. Is this how he shows friendship?" Among other things. Garrett studied his Raven companion. Corvus had never taken to strangers this quickly. The bird was a rescue from an illegal biomodification ring, his brain enhanced with empathic receptors that made him hypersensitive to emotional distress. For him to be this calm around Lyra meant something significant. "He likes you. I like him too." She scratched under Corvus's chin, earning a contented purr that sounded more like a cat than a bird. "On Zephyr, we believe ravens carry messages between worlds. Maybe he brought us together for a reason." Before Garrett could respond to that unsettling thought, the medical bay doors hissed open. The woman who entered moved with fluid grace despite her obvious anxiety, her silver hair flowing like liquid mercury over shoulders draped in formal diplomatic robes. She was tall for a Zephyrian, with the same pale blue skin as her daughter, but bearing the intricate facial markings that indicated high rank. "Lyra!" Relief flooded her musical voice as she rushed toward the bed. "When the embassy received word of the disturbance—" She stopped short when she noticed Garrett, her silver eyes narrowing as they took in his injuries. "You were hurt, protecting my daughter." "Anyone would have done the same," Garrett said, which they both knew was a lie. The diplomat's gaze shifted between him and Lyra, noting how the child leaned protectively against the human's side, how the modified Raven had positioned himself as a bridge between all three of them. "I am Sarah Lynn of the 7th House, third speaker for Zephyrian interests on this station." Her voice carried formal authority, but underneath it, Garrett detected genuine gratitude. "I owe you a debt I cannot easily repay." "Don't owe me anything, ma'am. Just doing what was right." Sarah Lynn studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Zephyrians were naturally telepathic with their own kind, but Garrett had heard they could sense strong emotions in other species. Whatever she was picking up from him seemed to satisfy her initial suspicions. "Nevertheless, you put yourself at considerable risk for a child you didn't know." She moved closer, her diplomatic training evident in every calculated gesture. "May I ask what motivated such altruism?" Garrett felt the familiar tightness in his chest whenever anyone probed too deeply into his past. "Sometimes you just do what needs doing." Lyra looked up at him with those disturbing, perceptive eyes. "He was thinking about someone else," she said softly. "Someone who needed protection but didn't get it." The silence stretched uncomfortably until Corvus broke it with a soft trill. The raven had somehow sensed the emotional undertow and moved to defuse it, hopping from his perch to Lyra's outstretched arm, and then to Sarah Lynn's shoulder. The diplomat started in surprise, then smiled as Corvus gently preened a strand of her hair. "He accepts you," Lyra said with obvious delight. "That means you're family now." Sarah Lynn's laugh was like silver bells, and for a moment, her formal mask slipped entirely. "Is that how it works?" "It's how it works," Garrett confirmed, watching the interplay between mother and daughter with something that felt dangerously close to longing. They were clearly devoted to each other, but there was an underlying tension he couldn't identify. "Your daughter's got quite a gift. The healing thing, that's going to be important someday. More important than you know." Sarah Lynn's expression grew serious. "The seventh house has served as healers and mediators for 12 generations. Lyra represents the continuation of that legacy." She paused, studying Garrett's face. "But gifts mean nothing without wisdom to guide them. Today, she learned something about courage from a stranger that all my teachings could not provide." Lyra beamed up at Garrett. "Can we keep him, Mama? Please? He and Corvus could live with us in the diplomatic quarter. I could practice my healing on him when he gets hurt at work, and he could teach me about human courage, and—" "Lyra." Sarah Lynn's voice held gentle reproof, but her eyes remained thoughtful as they studied Garrett. "We cannot simply keep people. They have lives of their own." "Actually," Garrett said slowly, surprising himself, "I've got quarters in the dock workers section. Not much to look at, but there's room for visitors." He looked at Lyra, then at her mother. "If you wanted to continue those healing lessons." The hope that bloomed in Lyra's face was almost painful to witness. "Really? You'd let me practice on you?" "Someone's got to," Garrett said gruffly. "Might as well be someone who's trying to help." Sarah Lynn was quiet for a long moment, her diplomat's mind clearly working through implications and possibilities. When she spoke again, her voice held a warmth that hadn't been there before. "That is very generous. Perhaps we could arrange regular visits. For educational purposes." "Educational purposes," Garrett agreed, though they both knew it was already something more than that. Corvus spread his wings and gave a satisfied croak, as if the matter was now settled to his complete approval. Lyra clapped her hands in delight, and for the first time in years, Garrett found himself looking forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. As the medical bay filled with the sound of the child's laughter, none of them noticed the way the station's air recycling system seemed to hum a little more smoothly, or how the dying plants in the corridor outside had begun to straighten their stems. 3 weeks into their unlikely friendship, the station's central bioprocessors began to fail. Garrett first noticed it during his morning shift when the air in Cargo Bay 7 started tasting metallic and thin. By noon, environmental alarms were echoing through every corridor, and by evening, Chief Administrator Corvus was calling emergency meetings with department heads he'd never bothered speaking to before. "The biofilters are dying," Dr. Henley from Life Support explained to the crowded briefing room, her usually steady voice tight with worry. We're looking at complete system failure within 72 hours, maybe less. Garrett sat in the back with the other dock supervisors, listening to experts throw around technical terms that boiled down to one simple fact. They were screwed. The station supported 12,000 residents, and the nearest evacuation point was 6 days away by the fastest transport. The numbers didn't work. "What about replacement filters?" someone called out. "The bioorganisms that process our atmosphere are cultivated on Kepler Station," Dr. Henley replied. "They take months to mature, and the existing cultures are, well, they're dying faster than we can understand why." Administrator Corvus, a heavy-set Terran with the permanent scowl of a man who'd never expected to deal with actual crises, jabbed at his datapad. "So fix it. That's what we pay you science types for. Sir, with respect, this isn't a mechanical problem. These are living organisms that have been filtering station air for 15 years. Something is killing them at the cellular level, and we can't identify what." Garrett found his thoughts drifting to Lyra, who had been visiting his quarters every evening for healing practice. The kid had been making remarkable progress. Yesterday, she'd completely eliminated a nasty plasma burn on his forearm that should have taken weeks to heal naturally. But more interesting was what happened around her when she worked. Plants seemed healthier. The air seemed cleaner. Even Corvus appeared more energetic after spending time with her. "What if it's not about fixing what's broken?" Garrett said, surprised to hear his own voice cutting through the increasingly panicked discussion. "What if it's about replacing it with something better?" The room fell silent. Administrator Corvus looked irritated at the interruption. "Supervisor Thorne, unless you've suddenly acquired a doctorate in xenobiology, I've acquired a friend who can make dying things live again," Garrett said steadily. "And I've been watching her work for 3 weeks. Dr. Henley leaned forward with interest. "You're talking about the Zephyrian child? I heard rumors about her abilities, but healing and atmospheric processing are entirely different." "Are they?" Garrett stood up, aware that every eye in the room was on him. "The kid touches something sick, it gets better. The air around her is cleaner than anywhere else on the station. The plants in my quarters have tripled in size since she started visiting." He looked around the room at faces ranging from skeptical to desperate. "Maybe we're thinking about this wrong. Maybe we don't need to fix the filters. Maybe we need to heal them." Administrator Corvus snorted. "You want to risk 12,000 lives on the parlor tricks of an alien child?" "I want to save 12,000 lives using the gifts of an alien child," Garrett corrected. "But we'd need her mother's permission, and we'd need to be smart about how we do it." The walk to the diplomatic quarter felt longer than usual, weighed down by the magnitude of what he was about to ask. Corvus rode on his shoulder, unusually quiet, as if the raven sensed the gravity of the situation. When Saralyn answered her door, her silver eyes immediately searched his face. "Something's wrong," she said. It wasn't a question. "The station's dying," Garrett said simply, "and I think Lyra might be the only one who can save it." He explained the situation as Lyra listened from her place at her mother's feet, her small hands absently stroking Corvus's feathers. When he finished, the silence stretched long enough to hear the subtle wheeze in the air recycling system. "You're asking me to risk my daughter's life," Saralyn said quietly, "to trust her power to a task that has defeated trained scientists." "I'm asking you to trust her power to do what it's meant to do," Garrett replied. "And I'm asking you to trust me to keep her safe while she does it." Lyra looked up at her mother with those 2 wise silver eyes. "Mama, remember what grandmother used to say? A gift unused is a curse upon the giver." Saralyn closed her eyes, and Garrett could see the war between her protective instincts and her diplomatic training. When she opened them again, there was steel in her gaze. "If we do this, it's not just about saving the station. Success could change how both our peoples view cooperation between species. Failure." She didn't need to finish the thought. "Then we don't fail," Garrett said simply. The bioprocessing center was a maze of organic tubes and cultivation tanks, all of them showing signs of the creeping death that was slowly suffocating the station. Dr. Henley met them at the entrance, her expression mixing hope and terror in equal measure. "The primary cultivation chamber is here," she explained, leading them through corridors lined with dying biomatter. "If her abilities can reverse the cellular decay process—" "It's not about reversing," Lyra said softly, studying the walls with interest. "It's about understanding what they need to be healthy again." She placed her small hand against one of the organic panels, and immediately her skin began to glow. "They're lonely." "And afraid." Garrett felt Saralyn tense beside him. "What do you mean, afraid?" "Someone hurt them. On purpose." Lyra's voice held a certainty that made the adults exchange worried glances. "There's something bad in the processing cores, something that makes them sick when they try to clean the air." Dr. Henley's face went pale. "Sabotage? But who would—" She stopped, her expression shifting as the implications hit her. "If someone wanted to create an evacuation scenario, force the station to be abandoned, then they'd need the biofilters to fail right on schedule," Garrett finished grimly. He knelt beside Lyra, meeting her silver eyes. "Can you heal them? Even if someone's trying to keep them sick?" The 8-year-old considered this with the seriousness of a seasoned diplomat. "Not just heal," she said finally. "Protect. Make them stronger than the bad thing trying to hurt them." She moved toward the central processing chamber with the confidence of someone following an internal compass. Corvus flew ahead, his enhanced senses mapping the emotional landscape of the dying biosystem. When they reached the massive cultivation tank that served as the station's primary air processor, Lyra placed both hands against its surface and closed her eyes. The transformation began slowly, a faint luminescence spreading from her touch point through the organic matrix. But as her concentration deepened, the light intensified, and Garrett could hear something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: the sound of healthy organisms processing air with quiet efficiency. "Remarkable," Dr. Henley breathed. "The cellular regeneration rate is off the charts, but more than that, she's somehow strengthening their resistance to whatever toxin was introduced." Saralyn moved to stand beside Garrett, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "She's never attempted anything this complex before," she murmured, and he heard the worry underlying her professional calm. "She's stronger than you think," Garrett said quietly, "and she's not doing it alone." As if to prove his point, Corvus landed gently on Lyra's shoulder, his presence seeming to steady her as the healing light spread throughout the entire bioprocessing network. The child's face was serene with concentration, but Garrett could see the effort in the fine tremor of her hands. Without conscious thought, he moved forward and placed his palm gently on her back, offering whatever strength he could. A moment later, Saralyn did the same, her touch completing a circuit of support that seemed to amplify Lyra's natural abilities. Together, they watched 12,000 lives worth of breathable air begin to flow clean and pure once more. The saboteur struck during the third night of Lyra's healing work. Garrett woke to Corvus's harsh warning cries and the acrid smell of burning biomatter. Emergency klaxons were already wailing as he pulled on his clothes, but it was the sound of Lyra's terrified scream that sent him running through the corridors toward the processing center. He found chaos. Someone had introduced a concentrated toxin directly into the primary cultivation chambers, causing massive system failures that were spreading faster than Lyra could counteract them. The 8-year-old stood in the center of the destruction, her small form blazing with healing light, as she desperately tried to save the dying organisms around her. "Too much!" she cried as Garrett reached her. "There's too much poison, and it keeps coming." Saralyn was already there, her diplomat's robes singed from proximity to the failing biosystems. "Whoever did this, they're actively maintaining the contamination. Every time Lyra heals a section, more toxin gets introduced." Dr. Henley stumbled through the emergency lighting, her face grim. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before complete atmospheric failure. The backup systems can't handle this kind of damage." Garrett's mind shifted into the same cold calculation mode that had kept him alive during the worst of the economic collapse. Problem: someone was continuously poisoning the system. Solution: stop them. "Corvus," Track. The Raven's enhanced senses had already locked onto something. He launched himself toward a maintenance access panel, his cries growing more urgent. When Garrett pried open the panel, he found illegal tapping equipment connected directly to the bioprocessing feeds, and a small device still actively pumping toxins into the system. "Got it," he called out, ripping the contamination device free. But even as he destroyed the equipment, more alarms began sounding from other sections. "There are multiple insertion points," Dr. Henley realized with growing horror. "This isn't random sabotage. It's a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm any repair attempts." Garrett felt that familiar cold fury building in his chest. Someone had planned to murder 12,000 people, and they'd nearly succeeded in using Lyra's compassion to make it happen. He activated his comm unit. "All dock supervisors, this is Thorne. Emergency Protocol 7. I need every maintenance team with access codes to bioprocessing substations. We've got contamination devices throughout the system." Within minutes, his people were reporting in from across the station. Loading dock crews, cargo handlers, maintenance workers. The forgotten backbone of station operations suddenly mobilized with military precision. One by one, they located and destroyed the sabotage equipment. But the damage was already catastrophic. "It's not enough," Lyra said, her voice small and exhausted. The light around her was flickering now, her young body pushed beyond safe limits. "Even with the poison stopped, there's too much death. I can't reach it all in time." That's when Garrett understood what had to be done. The bioprocessing system was spread throughout the station's superstructure, kilometers of organic conduits and cultivation chambers. Lyra couldn't physically reach every contaminated section, but her power didn't have to be limited by physical proximity. "The air circulation system," he said suddenly. "If you can heal the air itself as it moves through the station—" "That's impossible," Dr. Henley protested. "The volume of atmosphere, the energy requirements—" "She's not doing it alone," Sarah Lynn interrupted, understanding immediately. "The connection works both ways." She moved to her daughter's side, placing her hands on the child's shoulders. "All of us together." Lyra looked up at the adults with trust that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "Will it work?" "It'll work," Garrett said with more confidence than he felt. He positioned himself behind her, his large hands covering Sarah Lynn's, creating a stable foundation for whatever came next. "Corvus, we need you too." The raven landed on Lyra's head, his talons gentle as they gripped her silver hair. His enhanced neural receptors would help coordinate and amplify their combined efforts. "Now," Sarah Lynn said softly, "reach out through the air itself. Feel every breath the station takes." Lyra closed her eyes and extended her consciousness along with her power. The light around her changed, becoming less focused but more pervasive, flowing outward like luminous mist. Garrett felt the moment when her healing energy merged with the station's atmosphere, turning every breath of recycled air into a carrier of renewal. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Throughout the station, dying bioprocessors suddenly blazed with new life. Contaminated air scrubbers began functioning at peak efficiency. Even the backup systems that had been struggling under the crisis load smoothed into optimal operation. But the effort was enormous. Lyra's small body shuddered with the strain, and Garrett could feel Sarah Lynn trembling with the effort of channeling her daughter's power across such a vast area. His own strength was being drawn into the healing network, his lifetime of physical labor suddenly converted into raw energy for Lyra to direct. Corvus was the key that held them all together. The Raven's enhanced brain processed the emotional feedback from the healing network, preventing any of them from being overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were attempting. His presence kept Lyra grounded and safe, even as her consciousness expanded to encompass the entire station's life support system. Minutes felt like hours. Garrett's vision grayed at the edges as his body's reserves were channeled into keeping 12,000 people breathing clean air. He felt Sarah Lynn's grip on his hands tighten, her own strength faltering, but she held on through sheer determination. And then, suddenly, it was over. The emergency klaxons fell silent. The acrid smell of dying biomatter was replaced by the clean, sweet scent of healthy atmospheric processing. Throughout the station, people were breathing easily for the first time in days. Lyra collapsed into Garrett's arms, unconscious but peaceful. Corvus settled protectively on her chest, his dark eyes bright with satisfaction. Saralyn swayed on her feet, exhausted but triumphant. "Status report," Garrett called out on his comm, his voice rough with fatigue. The responses came back from every section of the station. All green. Systems nominal. Air quality optimal. Dr. Henley stared at her instruments in amazement. "It's not just repaired," she said slowly. "The entire bioprocessing network is functioning at levels we've never seen before. She didn't just heal the damage, she improved everything." Administrator Corvash's voice crackled over the comm system, addressing the entire station. "The crisis is over. Thanks to the efforts of our maintenance crews, led by Doc Supervisor Thorne, and the remarkable abilities of our Zephyrian allies, all systems are now operating normally." Garrett looked down at the sleeping child in his arms, then up at her mother. Saralyn's silver eyes were bright with tears and something else, something that made his heart skip irregularly in his chest. "She saved us all," Saralyn whispered. "We saved us all," Garrett corrected gently. "Together." When Saralyn leaned into his embrace, her forehead resting against his shoulder as they both watched over her sleeping daughter, Garrett realized that some things were worth believing in after all. The ceremony took place in Central Plaza, with what seemed like the entire station in attendance. Garrett stood uncomfortably in his best dock supervisor uniform. Corvus perched proudly on his shoulder as Administrator Corvash droned through official proclamations that transformed personal actions into political necessity. In recognition of extraordinary service to the preservation of life and the advancement of interspecies cooperation, Corvash read from his prepared statement, "The Station Council hereby grants Garrett Thorne full citizenship status and the title of Chief Safety Coordinator." The crowd applauded politely, but Garrett barely heard them. His attention was focused on Lyra, who stood beside her mother in formal Zephyrian ceremonial robes, practically glowing with excitement. She'd insisted on wearing a small crown of bioluminescent flowers that responded to her mood by shifting through different colors, currently a brilliant gold that matched her joy. Additionally, Corvash continued, by special decree of the Zephyrian Diplomatic Corps and with the blessing of the Seventh House, Lyra of Zephyr is hereby adopted as ward and daughter to Citizen Thorne, with all rights and privileges thereto. This time the applause was genuine, led by the dock workers and cargo handlers who had become unlikely heroes during the crisis. Garrett felt his throat close up as Lyra broke protocol and launched herself into his arms, her small face radiant with happiness. "Now you're really my family," she whispered against his ear. "Forever and always." "Forever and always," he confirmed, surprised by how easily the words came. But it was the third proclamation that changed everything. "Finally," Administrator Corvash said, his bureaucratic tone unable to completely mask his personal satisfaction, "it is my honor to announce the engagement of Chief Safety Coordinator Thorne to Third Speaker Saralyn of the Seventh House, pending the completion of appropriate cultural and legal formalities." The plaza erupted. Zephyrian wedding ceremonies were legendary for their beauty and complexity, but the prospect of the first officially sanctioned human-Zephyrian marriage had captured everyone's imagination. Saralyn stepped forward, her diplomatic composure cracking to reveal the warm, genuine smile that Garrett had fallen in love with over weeks of late-night conversations and shared worries about Lyra's well-being. She took his free hand, the one not currently occupied with hugging his new daughter, and spoke in the formal cadences required for such occasions. "In the presence of witnesses and with the blessing of both our peoples, I accept this bond and pledge my heart to the building of our shared future." Garrett looked out at the sea of faces, human, Zephyrian, and a dozen other species, all watching with approval and hope. A month ago, he'd been a bitter dock worker with nothing to lose. Now he was somehow a coordinator, a father, and a groom-to-be, with responsibilities that extended far beyond his comfortable isolation. "I don't know much about formal speeches," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the plaza. "But I know what it means to protect the people you love, and I know what it means to find family when you thought you'd lost everything." He looked down at Lyra, then at Saralyn. "I promise to do right by both of you and by everyone counting on us to make this work." The celebration that followed lasted well into the station's night cycle. Garrett found himself shaking hands with people he'd never met, accepting congratulations from species he couldn't even identify, and trying to process how completely his life had changed. Through it all, Corvus remained a steady presence on his shoulder, preening occasionally to accept compliments on his own role in recent events. But the moment that mattered most came later, in the quiet of their shared quarters, expanded now to accommodate their new family configuration. Lyra was curled up asleep between two adults, her small form surrounded by the soft glow that had become as natural as breathing. Corvus roosted on his favorite perch, one bright eye watching over all of them. "Are you having second thoughts?" Saralyn asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper in the dimness. Garrett considered the question seriously. "About becoming a father overnight? About marrying someone from a completely different species? About taking responsibility for problems way above my pay grade?" He felt her tense slightly and quickly added, "No, not for a second." "Good," she said, relaxing against his side. "Because the Zephyrian Council is already making plans to expand our biohealing cooperation program to 12 other stations. Your practical approach to problem solving combined with our people's natural abilities." She trailed off, but he could hear the excitement in her voice. "Sounds like we're going to be busy," Garrett observed. "Very busy. There will be travel, diplomatic functions, probably some formal education requirements for you to understand the cultural complexities." She was warming to the topic, her diplomatic training taking over. "Saralyn." "Yes? Are you happy?" The question seemed to surprise her. In the dim light, he could see her expression shift from professional calculation to something much more personal. "Yes," she said simply. "For the first time in years, I'm genuinely happy." Lyra stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about ravens and starships. Without waking, she reached out and patted Garrett's arm, then curled closer to her mother. Corvus gave a soft, contented trill from his perch. Garrett closed his eyes and tried to memorize the moment, the weight of his new daughter against his side, the warmth of the woman he loved, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that tomorrow would bring challenges he was actually equipped to handle. Outside their quarters, 12,000 people breathed clean air processed by biosystems that would continue working efficiently for decades to come. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life he'd choose, given the chance to do it all over again. Sometimes the best families were the ones you built from scratch, piece by piece, with love and determination and the willingness to protect what mattered most. 6 months later, when the first batch of biohealing technicians graduated from their joint training program, Garrett stood with Saralyn and Lyra watching young humans and Zephyrians work together to install improved atmospheric systems on Kepler Station. The partnership they'd forged in desperation had become a model for cooperation that was already spreading throughout the sector. "Look, Papa," Lyra said, tugging on his sleeve. At 9 years old now, she was taller and more confident, her healing abilities growing stronger every day under careful guidance. "They're using the techniques we developed together." Garrett smiled, watching technicians implement solutions that combined human engineering practicality with Zephyrian biological intuition. "That they are, kiddo." "Think it'll work?" "It'll work," Lyra said with absolute certainty. "Because they're family now, too." Corvus spread his wings and gave an approving caw, as if the matter was settled to everyone's satisfaction. And perhaps it was. After all, the Raven had been right about everything else. in the growing network of stations now breathing cleaner air because of what they'd built together. Thousands of people were learning the same lesson Garrett had discovered in a marketplace during a moment of desperate choice. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is step forward when someone needs protecting, even when, especially when, you have everything to lose. The crowd never forgot what came next, because what came next was hope. And hope, as it turned out, was the most powerful force in the universe when wielded by the right family at the right time.